Our final speaker is Tzvi Orgad. Tzvi is a doctorate student at the Department of Jewish Art at the Bar-Ilan University. His research, Eliezer-Zusman, an 18th century synagogue painter at work, focuses on art in making of synagogues, paintings, and painters in Central and Eastern Europe in Middle Ages and early modern times. The title of Tzvi talks today is very intriguing, Judged, a Bird by Its Feathers. Did Eliezer-Zusman paint the Unterlimpurg synagogue?
He's there. He's listening to the conference. That's the real
שבת עובד פה או שאני... גם עם הקובות?
עם השרת אני לא יודע. השרת אני לא יודע אם זה עובד עם הקובות.
אם לא, אז חיצים. עובד. זה ימינה זה קדימה. אוקיי.
תדבר למיקרופון.
Thank you.
רגע. זה לא פול סקרין.
כי...
אני אפק בפול סקרין.
לא בטוח שאפשר.
אוקיי, לא, אפשר.
אוקיי.
Thank you.
Thank you. The synagogue painter Eliezer-Zusman signed his name on painting of 3 synagogues in southern Germany in the first half of the 18th century. Bechhofen Synagogue, painted in 1732, Hope Synagogue, painted in 1735, and Kirchheim Synagogue, painted in 1740. The painting of Unterlimpurg Synagogue, which were made in 1739 or 40, were also ascribed to Eliezer-Zusman, despite the fact that his signature was not found anywhere in this synagogue. The basis of this attribution was the painting's similarity to Eliezer-Zusman's sign paintings, not a comprehensive examination. In this talk, I argue that based on significant differences from his other works, Eliezer-Zusman probably didn't paint the Unterlimpurg synagogue. In order to demonstrate these differences, I will refer to some aspects of art in making as they manifest in Eliezer-Zusman's sign paintings and in the Unterlimpurg synagogue paintings. I first refer to 2 paintings of birds holding objects in their beaks in the Unterlimpurg and Hope synagogues. In the Hope synagogue, the bird has a large decorative tail, horns like feathers on its head, and it holds a gray organic-looking object in its beak. The bird painted on the ceiling of the Unterlimpurg synagogue bears a resemblance to a cock with its elegant comb, and it holds a horseshoe in its beak. In order to prove that these 2 different paintings may express a similar idea, their shared iconographic intent will be now demonstrated. Depiction of ostrich in Christian medieval resources resemble the birds painted in both synagogues. It is depicted in Christian illustrated sources such as bestiary and aviary books, as well as in Speculum Humanae Salvationis. Like the bird in Hope synagogue, the ostriches painted in the Clairvaux aviary and in the Terdino aviary have 2 horns, feathers on their ears or on their forehead. An attribute associated with an ostrich in many illustrated Christian sources is eggs laid down on the ground. In the following pictures, we find a pair of ostriches. One of them organizes the eggs on the ground, and the other turns its head to the sun, expressing his devotion. This depiction might refer to the verse from Iyov, which describes the ostrich, or knaf renanim, as a bird which leaves its eggs on the ground where they are in danger of being crushed by men or animals. The ostrich depicted in Bestiaire de Moore from the 14th century was rewarded for its prayers, and as seen here, its eggs are nourished by a sunbeam. We also encounter here another attribute typical to illustrated medieval ostriches, a horseshoe held in its beak. This depiction may demonstrate the belief based on Pliny's farce that the ostrich has the marvelous property of being able to digest any substance at all. Note that these two ostriches, which are very differently depicted, hold horseshoes in their beaks. The illuminated manuscripts of Speculum Humanae Salvationis, a book with side-to-side scenes from the Old Testament and the New Testament, portray an alternative ostrich practice. Depicted opposite Daniel in the lion's den, the ostrich saves its young chick from the glass vehicle by using reptile blood. In some manuscripts, this reptile looks like a worm and also resembles a stylized horseshoe. This legendary bird was painted in a 16th century wooden church of Kozy, a village located about 65 kilometers southwest of Krakow, Poland. Barbara Wolf-Urzinska argues that although resembling a phoenix in some ways, this is really a painting of an ostrich. The bird's horns resemble those of painted ostriches from medieval illuminated manuscripts, while the object in its beak may be a stylized horseshoe or a worm. This image proves that this symbol was also present in church art in Eastern Europe. Ostriches with similar attributes are found in medieval Jewish illuminated sources. For example, the ostrich painted during the early 14th century held a horseshoe in its beak. In Jewish sources, several names refer to the ostrich. One of them, which we have already encountered, is Knaf Renanim in the book of Iyov. Other names are Naamit in the Palestinian Talmud, Bat Yaana in the book of Leviticus, and Bat Naamita in the translation of Onkelos. Another legendary bird found in Jewish sources is the Bar Yochani, which the Talmud also calls Knaf Renanim. It is known as a gigantic bird. The Talmud relates that once one of its eggs fell, causing 60 towns to drown and breaking down 300 cedar trees. The Bar Yochani, depicted as a bird with duck feet incubating a large egg, appears in this famous French miscellaneous manuscript from the 13th century. The painter didn't trust the reader's knowledge about legendary birds, so therefore he added its name in a caption underneath it. In the 18th century illustrated Gwodzic wooden synagogue, we find a similar painted case, a bird which gazes at 3 eggs. This may signify keeping one's eyes from evil, as expressed in the 12th century book Kava Yashar. A caption identified the bird as an ostrich, Batayana. Another Jewish mythical bird, called Ziz, is one of the 3 animals which, according to rabbinic tradition, will be served at the Messianic feast alongside to the ox and Leviathan. Note that this Ziz, although painted as a griffin, has 2 horns very similar to the horns of the alleged ostrich from the wooden church of Kozy. Joseph Gutman discussed the Ziz in rabbinic sources. According to Gutman, Ziz and Bar Yochani, 2 distinct legendary birds in the Talmud, were subsequently combined into one single messianic bird in later rabbinic literature. Based on this, we can relate to the illustrated griffin as a Bar Yochani. As we saw in the Talmud, the sages clearly associate Bar Yochani with Knaf Renanim, which is the Bat Yana, or ostrich. This suggests that later rabbinic literature understood Ziz, Bar Yochani, and Knaf Renanim all referring to the same bird. Ziz also appears in Psalm 50, where its name was translated by medieval Aramaic translation to Tarnegol Bara. So we can also consider this another name for Bar Yochani, or the ostrich. In the Babylonian Talmud, we find a legend about Tarnegola Bara and the Shamir, the worm that cut stones during the building of the temple. So, I'll translate. This legend describes how King Solomon obtained the Shamir. It was handed by God to the Lord of the Sea, who was giving it to Tarnegola Bara as a deposit. Tarnagola bara is described in this legend as a diligent creature who does good for mankind. It uses the shamir to cleave rocks in unpopulated high mountains in order to sow tree seeds so people can settle there. Tarnagola bara's end was bitter. In order to obtain the shamir, King Solomon sent one of his slaves to find Tarnagola bara's nest and cover it with white glass. When Tarnagola bara couldn't reach its young chicks under the glass, it brought the shamir to put it on the glass in order to break it. But the slave threw a stone on Tarnagola bara, causing it to flee, leaving the shamir behind on the glass and enabling the slave to grab it and deliver it to King Solomon. Tarnagola bara felt guilty for not guarding the deposit, so he strangled himself to death. A real martyr for the cause of building the temple. Going back to the two synagogue paintings in southern Germany, I suggest that these two paintings represent Tarnagola bara, a wild cock, visually relying on different visual traditions of painted ostriches. The horns of the bird in the Hope synagogues are similar to the horns of the Ziz in the 13th century manuscripts and the ostrich in the Cozy church. The object in its beak looks like a worm or a leech, and its gray shade indicates a metal object. This metallic worm can be therefore identified as the shamir. As we already saw, similar objects can also be found in Christian painting traditions. The bird painted in Unterlimpurg synagogue looks more like a cock, maybe because Tarnagola bara's name implies that this bird is some kind of a cock. The object in its beak is definitely a horseshoe, but unlike most medieval painted horseshoe in birds' beaks, this one is not hung from the bird's beak. Its near side is pointed outwards like holding a knife. This may suggest that this particular horseshoe is the shamir, not just a plain piece of metal. Resolving the shared identity of these two birds, we should raise the question: if one painter made these two paintings within only 3 years, why did he use different visual sources in order to express the same idea? There are many other examples of differences between the Unterlimpurg synagogue's painting and Eliezer-Zusman's signed paintings. I will only mention some of them. The first one refers to the lions blowing trumpets flanking the liturgical poem How Fun. In Beethoven and Horb synagogues, these lions are painted on the western wall, flanking around a decorated border. The painted trumpets are similar. They have handles from which strands descend. In the Unterlimpurg synagogue, the poem was most probably written on the eastern wall, inside a quadrifold cartouche, a decorative element which cannot be found in Eliezer-Zusman's signed works. The trumpets have no handles and look more like oboes or flutes. From the poses of the two pairs of lions, I missed one. Okay, these are the flutes, the horns. From the poses of the two pairs of lions, it is clear that the later one was copied from the early painting. Also, when examining the paintings of the lions, actual copy traces can be found in the Unterlimpurg synagogue painter handwriting. The lions in the Hope synagogue are painted with dynamic strokes, and the shading appear organic. In the Unterlimpurg, the contour lines are stiff, and the geometric shading doesn't match the anatomic structure of the animal. It appears as if the painter copied the contours and filled in the shading. Another difference between the synagogue paintings signed by Eliezer-Zusman and the paintings of the Unterlimpurg synagogue is manifest in an ornamental scheme that serves as a border between different kinds of panels. The scheme appears in the Beethoven and Horb synagogues, which were painted before the Unterlimpurg synagogue. It also appears in the Kirchheim synagogue, painted after the Unterlimpurg synagogue. Nevertheless, in the Unterlimpurg synagogue itself, this ornamental scheme is absent. From these examples, it is quite clear that more than one painter worked in southern Germany in the first half of the 18th century. Searching for a hint for the identity of the painter of the Unterlimpurg synagogue, we should pay attention to one field where there is clear resemblance between the Horb and Unterlimpurg synagogue paintings, the typography of the inscriptions. The similarity is evident in the type of letters and in the vegetal decorations in the middle of each vertical part in both synagogues. Letters like Lamed feature a special branch-shaped decoration on its flag, and the Yod gets twisted in the same manner. Therefore, there's possibility that one craftsman wrote the inscription in both synagogues cannot be rejected. The text in the Unterlimpurg synagogue, the second one, which reads, written in the year 499, supports this assumption. Unlike Eliezer-Zusman's signatures, it emphasizes the act of writing. It says nichtav, and not the act of painting, which might imply that it was written by a scribe, not by a painter. One more significant difference between these two texts is that in Unterlimpurg, the text uses a different system of Hebrew numerology. As you can see, here it says tatzat. Here you must find the letters and make a lot of calculations. These are only some of the examples which support concluding that the painter of the Unterlimpurg synagogue was not Eliezer-Zusman. But he obviously knew Eliezer-Zusman's works, which he imitated up to a certain point. On the other hand, he was familiar with other sources which he used as models for his paintings. It is possible that he was a journeyman or an apprentice of Eliezer-Zusman in his work in other synagogues and wrote the inscriptions there. This might explain the similarity in typography and the resemblance of the decorative motifs and general appeal. When comparing the Unterlimpurg synagogue paintings to Eliezer-Zusman's signed works, it can be concluded that birds can be judged by their feathers. These feathers can potentially teach us much more than just about one additional synagogue painter who worked in southern Germany in the time of Eliezer-Zusman. This recognition promises to shed much new light on Eliezer-Zusman's works and on the influential regional Eliezer-Zusman school of painting in the first half of the 18th century.
שאלות קהל. עכשיו, שאלות קהל.
Thank you, Zvi, for such an eye-opening lecture. And I want to thank all the speakers. And now it's time for questions. So, who wants to begin? You want to?
Did you hear?
I think you will stay in your chairs.
Did you hear?
So who wants to start?
Did you hear everything okay? No? No? You don't hear anything?
Okay.
Nothing?
I have a question for each speaker, so I'm going to do it. Okay, Effie, the first speaker. What was in the Nahar synagogue? What was the statue? Was it a serpent?
We don't know.
Oh, that's
It doesn't say. It just Talmud specifies that a certain image was put there, and the purpose of the image was for idol worship, and it was apparently supposed to be offensive towards the Jews, that at the entrance to the synagogue a certain image was posted. And the Talmud makes a special point in declaring that Nevertheless, and although the image was there, very prominent rabbis, and there's a list of prominent rabbis, did not shy away from attending the synagogue because apparently it was seen as completely different from the synagogue. It was put there by force. It was not the intention of the makers. It was not a self-adornment by the Jews, but rather something that was juxtaposed upon the Jewish population in this synagogue of Shafri Atid in Helga.
Okay. For Eva, I wanted to mention that in the Sephardic manuscripts, you do see women holding books, which is interesting. Okay, who's the next speaker?
Shall I respond to this very quickly?
Sarah, I have a question for Sarah. That, well, say the Bayeux tapestry, for example, they make a point that the marginal illustrations say a lot about the daily life, and here you seem to show that the marginal illustrations are also text related. And I wonder if you find that in all manuscripts or just with this figure of the knight?
This is not exactly,
Fair.
it's not in the margins, at least in
Yes.
the Michael
Can
box.
you speak from the podium, please?
Yes.
Yeah, you can come.
In the Michael Machzor, it's not from the margins. It illustrates the initial panel of the piyut. And I'm not aware of any other manuscript, perhaps some other people know, of this particular piyut, which is illustrated. Because it's not the usual piyut that is illustrated. And besides that, this manuscript and the images in this manuscript are very militant. There are a lot of warriors there, which finds me, for me, it's very fascinating. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention that the folk motif of Tarnagola Bar continues to be very, very active in Eastern Europe, and becomes the whoopie bird or the firebird. And I wondered if you
I didn't go beyond the Eliezer-Zusman, so maybe in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to thank Tzvi for showing me just another shamir because I'd like to be corrected. I don't think it appears very often in Jewish art in general and in illuminated manuscripts. I only know it from a late 16th century manuscript in a different context. So thank you very much. But what actually bothers me is the exact identification or the definite identification of this motif as the shamir. You can tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, first thing, it's not definite.
Okay.
Nothing is definite. Second thing, I would like also to thank you for mentioning the 16th century manuscript because I don't know it. Okay, thank you. And what I wanted to show that this motive of the horseshoe and the little worm is maybe the same. I'm not sure that it's the same, but I think I establish it to a certain level. I think it must be continued, the research must be continued in order to prove it. Maybe it can be proved. Okay, thank you.
We have a question from Emile Schrijver in Amsterdam. Okay, Emile. Just a second.
Okay, I will have to.
Yeah.
I will have to switch off my live stream because that's 20 seconds later, so I hear myself talking 20 seconds later. I just wanted to make a general remark. I mean, I was supposed to be the chair for this session to begin with, so I'd rather make a general remark, which is that what I see, and I've been looking at medieval art history, or the art history of medieval Hebrew manuscripts for 30 years now without being an art historian proper, we seem to be talking about single issues. So if I would have to criticize Avi Shoham's first lecture, we talk a lot just about Cologne, but the picture is so much wider. And with Eva, I had the same question: why I speak about gender of the book, the question of female involvement in Hebrew books in the medieval period, including female scribes just a little bit later, is a very difficult issue. And with Sara, she brought up Annette Weber's point also about the Chassidei Ashkenaz and micrography, the ideas of Chassidei Ashkenaz popping up in micrography. But what then about the ideas of Malachi Betarye, who said that, who pointed out that Chassidei Ashkenaz actually objected to that very micrography. What I see, which is very promising, is that we're raising all kinds of new questions. But I think that the amount of material is still giving us a very, very hard time. And I'm just curious to hear one of the speakers respond to that, because I think we're talking about single items and we're trying to analyze single items. But I would be interested in seeing a bigger picture. Please let me know what you think.
Sorry.
Do you hear on the mic here? No? Okay, he's not going to hear you live. He's going to hear you a little bit later, like half a minute. Okay, so just talk.
Half a minute, I can wait.
Yeah.
Emile, thank you very much. Can I just tell you what my thinking was, and I'll tell everybody as well. I was originally going to just talk about Christian illuminators working for Jewish patrons, and I was just going to talk about one book, which is the Lord Mahzor, and just talk about the Latin instructions for the illuminator, because some people know them, but I think many people don't know them or haven't seen those photographs, and it might be a little bit less familiar. And it's something that interests me, and I've written about this before in a Bodleian context for an exhibition, but again, maybe people here don't know it, and I wanted to show more pictures. And then I was going to talk about where do we go from there? How do we talk about identity constructions, and what does it mean? So this is the bigger picture. What does it mean to construct social status that is a kind of lay status? And here I feel like I would like to connect with Effie. These are owners who, my thinking is, and I can't go into this, and I can't really prove it, but that the owners of some of these splendid manuscripts were not necessarily always rabbinic figures, but were a sort of a slightly different type of elite, still very learned, right? I mean, I can't sing those piyutim, it requires somebody who is pretty knowledgeable to sing those piyutim, though maybe I can learn. And so this was going to be the bigger picture. Then I looked at the program of the conference, and I looked at the statement that Ilya and perhaps his team put forward, and I looked at the program and I thought, hang on a second, only the modernists are talking about gender and feminism. Got to do something. So at this point, I'm not ready. I am simply not ready to make general statements. And I'm extremely aware that in the slightly late, that in different places, things are different, as Batsheva pointed out, and I completely agree, that there are women scribes. And again, I'm not denying that. I'm actually talking about something slightly different. I'm talking about ideological constructions of gender by means of images. This is a slightly different topic from saying who did what. Okay, so I'm very aware that there was whatever her name was, Paula, and I'm aware. On the other hand, I would suggest that if you looked at this in a statistical distribution, you would say, well, there were Paula and there were two other women and there were 25 men scribes. So, I still feel that this does not invalidate the association between the book and Jewish masculinity, and this is a very different construction of gender from the lay aristocratic Christian construction or ideologies of gender. That's what I find so interesting, that on the one hand, Jewish people are interested in what their Christian counterparts are doing. On the other hand, there are places where they can't quite do the same thing because meaning is configured in value, and what Bourdieu calls social capital and cultural capital is arrived at in a slightly different way. I am aware that Sara, you've made a slightly different foray into this. So you're talking about weapons, I'm talking about books, but I think, somewhere in the middle, I think we should over lunch have a really interesting conversation. So maybe in a year's time, or whenever, and hopefully other people, not me, somebody else will want to say more about gender, but I wanted to put it on the map because I was tired of, of course there's Eliseva's book, right? Which is an important start, but, she's doing she's working on different material. And then you look at the conference and it's the modernists who talk about gender. So I thought, right, I've got to do something as a good old-fashioned unreconstructed feminist. I have to, do something about it. But I'm not making claims about about realities. I'm saying that these are highly ideological, very mediated images that, anyway, sorry, too long. Shut up.
If it's okay to make a brief comment on this. Again, trying to look at the larger picture. I completely agree with Eva, and I think she's right on the mark there about the differences and the discrepancies between rabbinic culture and lay culture, and between people who are adorning manuscripts, but are not necessarily the exact or immediate consumers of these manuscripts. They use them as a way of projecting their self-esteem, their high social status, and so on and so forth. And I think this projects very well also in the synagogue decorations, if my assumption is correct that someone was behind this and was trying to kind of imply not only his social status, but his actual personality, his name, his attributions, his maybe coat of arms, so to speak. There are no coat of arms or that we know of in the 11th century, but it's a kind of a prequel to this kind of culture. But I think this is exactly what we're looking at, and we're not only looking at a social strata, we're also talking about regional identities. And I think in this respect, when we're talking about, for instance, the Jewish community of Cologne has its own specific identity. Part of its identity is the infusion of art into all kinds of aspects of Jewish culture. Architecture is one, but we know that the first illuminated manuscripts that we have from Ashkenaz are from in and around Cologne, from the Cologne area, from the Niederrhein. At least some of them, the most remarkable examples that I know of, and again, I'm not an art historian, and you of course can contradict my knowledge on this and tell me what the cutting edge understanding is, but it is my understanding that a lot of these artifacts surface in and around this area. That's one. Number two, some of the debates surface in and around this area. If you look at some of the responsa literature that discusses the Machzorim, it comes from the area of Cologne. The famous tshuva that is mentioned in Mayor of Rothenburg's responsa is by Asher ben Yechiel, and it's pitched to Mayor of Rothenburg, who's sitting in Worms, by Asher ben Yechiel, who's sitting in Cologne, and saying, everybody around me is using these illuminated manuscripts, and there are all kinds of illuminations there that I find offensive to a way, to a certain extent. Help me out here. And Mayor says, sorry, it's been happening all around. There's a limit to what we can object. And you can see that this is something that is part of a cultural attribution of this area that is markedly different than the attitudes of people living elsewhere. It's something we should discuss, something we should think about how these people construct their identities on a regional basis. What does this mean about their lineage and where they come from? Whether this is a different kind of subculture within the Ashkenazi culture, I don't know. I mean, this is a topic for further research, but this is definitely something that's going on. Right.
Okay, we'll hear from Sara and Tzvi, and then back to Emile, and I guess we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay. Regarding what Rabbi Yehuda Chassid wrote in Sefer Hasidim, he objected the micrography with the images. Well, he also objected in the next sentence, he objected to writing on the margins because it's difficult to read. And I'm always bringing this example in my classes, and then I am showing a single page, but it goes on for several pages, from the London Miscellany, one of the manuscripts illuminated in France in the end of the 13th century. And one of the texts written on the margins is Rabbi Yehuda Chassid's book, the earliest copy of Sefer Gimatriot. So not only that they are writing it on the margins, it's the book of the same person who objected to this kind of writing. And I'm always using a scan which I made in the Sholem reading room in Jerusalem, where Gershom Sholem, the late Gershom Sholem, wrote on the margins, but they did write it like that. So that's also right for the micrography. Thanks.
I want to say it is true that I deal with very little creature, a worm, but my point was much bigger because what I wanted to demonstrate is that until today many things that think that in southern Germany there was one synagogue painter, Eliezer-Zusman, and each time we find another synagogue, painted synagogue, it's Eliezer-Zusman. Another one, okay? But I think it opens a new era in the research of painted synagogues in southern Germany, to when you see that there are differences, okay? More than one.
Yeah.
I think you all make your point very clear. I mean, the whole issue with Sara with the micrography is very clear. The Sefer Hasidim actually responded to practice, is not the other way around. I mean, there's no reason to forbid something if it's not being done. The last point I wanted to make regarding Orgad is that he mentioned at the very end of his talk the issue of paleography. I think that is really where paleographers of the post-medieval period have something to gain, which is in the study of Hebrew lettering and the study of Hebrew paleography, not in books and not in manuscripts or printed books, but rather on objects. I mean, Annette Weber and myself have been doing some work on Torah binders. Tried to do some work on silver, which is very difficult because of the particular medium, but that's something I think that's very important, the interpretation of the calligraphy appearing on things. So I repeat, I regret not being with you today, but this was probably the best way to be part of this, and I thank you for enduring that.
All right. So, more?
No, I just wanted a brief comment on this.
Here, come on. Come.
On this, the question of patronage, really. I mean, this is something that art historians and book historians and culture historians out there speak about. Not only the Jewish context, there's a very interesting chapter by Jill Kasky on patronage as agency, and she addresses the question, for example, how patrons, commissioners, artists, consumers actually interact or not, or don't interact in order to construct ideologies or whatever issues. So patronage is a tricky thing, and somebody pays, other people consume, other people look at it, other people decide what's going to be there. But there's a whole bunch of literature out there that I think we can rely on and use the same methods or thoughts or in order to come to terms also with Machzorim. I mean, Machzorim are books that are read in synagogues, which actually determines that sort of agency pretty well, much more than, of course, the Haggadah, which is a private book. So I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she did Jill Kasky. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
no, I know her work well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Can
I mean,
respond?
yeah.
Can I respond to that?
No.
We don't have much
Lunch.
time.
Over
Lunch. So, last question.
I have a question regarding the Cologne Synagogue and the sculptures. If I understood you correctly, you would put it to the addition of after the destruction of 1096.
No, prior.
Prior. But to the addition.
Yes.
But this is, according to the findings, this should be the women's school.
Yes,
So when we have the patrons, let's say, arms on the women's school.
Okay, so I'll clarify.
Very
No, so I can understand the curiosity, and I want to straighten the record. Timeline. Synagogue probably the rectangular shape established in and around 1021, early 11th century. Due to the expansion of the community, there is an addition, a chapel. It's not the Frauenschule just yet. It will be a Frauenschule in the 13th century. That's how I understood both Doppelfeld's work as well as the recent work that's been done, and it is described there as the Frauenschule only from the 13th century. The thing is that prior to the 1096 destruction and renovation, the building of this new chapel is at the end of the 11th century, before the 1096 riots, and I would, in my, when I mythologized this in my mind, I was thinking of this small community leader, not so small, community leader, Yehuda ben Avram Aparnas, sitting there and holding court in that new chapel that he had commissioned and he had embellished and he had ornamented. And of course, this chapel, as well as the rectangular shape, in addition to it, is all suffers a very substantial damage during the 1096 riots, and everything is rebuilt. And only in the 13th century we have positive evidence. It may have also already been in the 12th, but in the 13th century we have positive evidence that this is the Frauenschule. I'm not sure at all that these decorations survived the destruction. It may well be that the decorations that are discussed in this specific piece of or letter of protest were also subject to desecration and mutilation during the riots, and never survived the 10 or 5 or 10 years that they actually were there. That's my understanding.